What does it take for the voice of a single man to hypnotize millions? For carefully chosen words not just to convey a message, but to redraw the emotional landscape of an entire nation. The power to move masses lies not only in logic, but in a deep and, at times, unsettling understanding of the human psyche. Here at The Truth, Dark Psychology, we dissect the invisible tools that shape our world. Today, we investigate the architecture of persuasion behind one of the most charismatic leaders of modern history, a man who personified hope. But we will discover that behind the inspiration, there are techniques of influence so potent they border on manipulation. If you're ready to look beyond the surface, subscribe, like, and prepare to question everything. Barack Obama's oratory is often cited as one of his greatest assets, but it is rarely analyzed as the sophisticated psychological weapon it truly is. It's not just about what he said, but fundamentally about how he said it. His cadence, the almost musical rhythm of his sentences, and the strategic use of pauses created a state of receptive trance in the audience. This technique, known in studies of hypnosis and neuro-linguistic programming as pacing and leading, calms the listener's critical mind. By mirroring a calm and confident rhythm, he first establishes nonverbal harmony, making the audience feel understood and safe, before subtly leading them to his conclusions and emotional appeals. This rhythmic mastery is a form of auditory environmental control. The human brain is wired to respond to patterns, and Obama exploited this to perfection. His dramatic pauses were not just for theatrical effect. They were empty spaces that the listener felt compelled to fill with their own agreement and emotion. This momentary vacuum generates a slight tension, and when he resumes speaking, the resolution of this tension creates a sense of relief and validation, positively reinforcing the message. It's a technique that diverts attention from the cold analysis of content to the sensory and emotional experience of the moment, making the audience far more susceptible to suggestion. Analyzing this through the lens of dark psychology, this ability can be seen as a form of emotional hijacking. By focusing on delivery and atmosphere, the actual content of his proposals could become secondary. People remembered not just the policies, but how they felt listening to him, hopeful, inspired, united. This powerful feeling, once associated with a figure, becomes a shield against future criticism. To question the person becomes the same as questioning that positive feeling within oneself, a defense mechanism that many are unwilling to trigger. The danger of this technique lies in its universality. It transcends barriers of education and ideology, appealing directly to primary cognitive processes. The same cadence that can inspire a nation for good can, in other hands, be used to justify questionable actions, to quell dissent, and to create a personality cult that inhibits critical thinking. The power was not just in the words hope and change, but in the hypnotic melody with which they were delivered, a melody that taught the brain to agree before the conscious mind could fully process the facts. Therefore, the question we must ask is not whether his oratory was effective, as that is undeniable. The real question is how conscious he and his team were of this layer of almost subliminal influence. Was it a natural gift or a scientifically calibrated tool for perception management? The line between a great communicator and a master manipulator is often defined only by intent, a variable that forever remains hidden in the shadows of the strategist's mind. Obama's charisma was amplified by a powerful psychological skill, mirroring. He possessed a chameleonic ability to reflect the language, posture, and even the values of the audience he was interacting with, making each group feel uniquely understood and represented by him. When speaking to academics, his language was cerebral and nuanced. With factory workers, his tone became more direct and his body language more open and down to earth. This is not just empathy. It is a highly effective persuasion technique that builds an instant bridge of trust, Disarming skepticism and opposition. This mirror strategy creates an illusion of shared identity. When a leader reflects our own characteristics, our primitive brain interprets them as one of us, activating in-group biases and lowering our critical defenses. It's a shortcut to loyalty that bypasses the need to prove competence through actions and results. Obama didn't need to convince every group that his policies were the best for them. He first convinced them that he was like them, and the acceptance of his policies came as a natural consequence of this established connection. From a dark psychology perspective, mirroring is a form of infiltration. By subtly imitating the other, the manipulator gains access to their psychological space, making their own ideas and suggestions much harder to reject. It's a tactic that elite salespeople and interrogators use to build rapport quickly. On the political stage, this allowed Obama to navigate an incredibly diverse electorate, leaving each faction with the impression that he was their particular champion, even when their agendas were conflicting. The inherent risk of this approach is the creation of a leader who is a reflection of everything, and therefore, the essence of nothing. The projected identity becomes more important than core convictions. The public falls in love with a version of themselves they see in the leader, not necessarily with the leader himself. This can lead to massive disillusionment when the leader's actions inevitably diverge from the expectations of a specific group. The feeling of betrayal becomes much deeper, as it's not just a policy that failed, but the shared identity itself that proved to be an illusion. In the end, Obama's empathic mirror was a tool of unification, but also a potential source of fragmentation. He united people under an umbrella of reflected charisma. But what happens when the mirror is removed? The image shatters, and people are forced to confront the differences that were temporarily obscured by the projected similarity. The ability to be all things to all people is an immense power, but it carries the price of a questionable authenticity and the promise of eventual disappointment. The pillars of Obama's campaign, the words hope and change, are masterpieces of the psychology of persuasion. They are powerful precisely because they are undefined. These concepts function as psychological blank canvases, empty vessels into which voters could project their deepest desires, dreams, and frustrations. For one person, change meant the end of a war. For another, economic reform. For a third, social justice. The campaign didn't need to sell a specific policy. It sold a feeling, a possibility, letting the individual's mind do the work of filling in the details. This is a subtle but extremely effective manipulation tactic. By using positive and vague language, a leader avoids the conflict and alienation that come with concrete and detailed policy proposals. Every specific promise creates an opposition group, but an ambiguous promise of hope is universally appealing and virtually impossible to attack directly. To criticize hope is to position oneself as cynical and pessimistic, a framing that few are willing to accept. The dark genius here is turning virtue itself into a weapon of conformity. The deliberate use of ambiguity exploits a cognitive bias known as the Forer effect, where people tend to accept vague and general personality descriptions as being accurate for them. Similarly, they accept vague political visions as being precisely what they desire. Obama became a political Rorschach. People didn't see a man with a fixed plan, but a reflection of their own version of a better future. This created a much stronger emotional bond than any 100-page policy document ever could. Asterisk. The danger of this strategy is revealed once power is achieved in ambiguity. Must give way to concrete action. Change inevitably takes a specific form that does not match everyone's projections. It is at this point that the sense of disappointment sets in. The very tool that united a diverse coalition becomes the source of its fracture. The leader is then accused of betraying the promise, when in reality, the promise was so open that it was impossible to fulfill for everyone simultaneously. The fault lies not just with the leader, but with the very nature of human psychology that yearns for easy answers and powerful symbols. Ultimately, the Hope and Change campaign was a fascinating experiment on the power of narrative over substance. It demonstrated that in the political arena, the emotion an idea evokes can be far more influential than the idea itself. It's a valuable lesson in how the control of language and symbols allows for the control of the masses. The question that remains is whether this tool, once used so successfully, has set a dangerous precedent for future leaders, teaching them that the best way to gain power is to promise everything while defining nothing. One of Barack Obama's most striking and psychologically potent characteristics was his unshakable calm, his famous no-drama Obama persona. In a political world driven by outrage, panic, and exaggerated reactions, his composure functioned as a psychological weapon. This serenity projected an aura of superior control and power, no matter the chaos around him. While his opponents seemed reactive, emotional, and therefore less in command, he remained the calm center of the storm, a figure of unquestionable authority. This calmness is not passivity. It is an active form of domination. In a negotiation or confrontation, the person who demonstrates less need and less emotional reactivity holds the power. Obama's composure often disarmed his adversaries who expected an emotional reaction to fuel the conflict. By not providing that reaction, he broke the script of the confrontation, forcing the other side to deal with their own aggression and anxiety. It's a technique of psychological jujitsu, using the opponent's strength and energy against them by simply refusing to be pulled into the fight on their terms. This armor of calm also serves as a powerful framing mechanism. By remaining serene in the face of a crisis or a fierce attack, he implicitly communicated to the nation, "This is not as serious as they want you to think. I have it under control." This allowed him to define the severity of any situation, calming public panic, or minimizing the validity of a political attack. For the average citizen, this stability was incredibly reassuring, creating a deep psychological dependence on the leader as the adult in the room. However, this same quality can be a barrier to authentic connection and can be perceived as coldness or aloofness. The absence of a visible emotional reaction can make people who are suffering feel that their pain is not being validated or understood on a visceral level. The same calm that projects strength to some can project a lack of empathy to others. It's the paradox of the Stoic leader. His strength is also his potential weakness, creating a distance that, while imposing, can eventually lead to alienation. Psychologically, the lesson is that control of one's own emotions is the most fundamental form of control over others and the environment. Obama's calculated serenity was not just a personality trait, but a deliberate strategy that served him immensely well. It neutralized attacks, projected authority, and managed public perception on a massive scale. It teaches us that in the arena of power, the most important battle is not the one we fight with words, but the internal battle against our own reactivity. If this deep analysis of the psychological tactics of power is opening your mind, take a moment and like this video. It helps us continue to bring content that challenges conventional thinking. Subscribe to The Truth, Dark Psychology so you don't miss our next dives into the minds of the most influential. And we want your opinion. Comment below with another public figure you'd like to see analyzed through our lens. No modern leader has had their life story so skillfully woven into their political persona as Barack Obama. His biography was not just a set of facts. It was transformed into a mythical narrative, a living archetype of reconciliation and the American dream. The son of a black Kenyan father and a white mother from Kansas, raised in Hawaii and Indonesia, his very existence was presented as a bridge between worlds, races, and cultures. This narrative was not accidental. It was the foundation upon which his political identity was built, appealing to a deep almost spiritual desire for unity in a divided nation. This strategy exploits the power of Carl Jung's archetypes in the collective psyche. Obama was carefully positioned not just as a candidate, but as a hero or chosen one, whose personal journey mirrored the journey the nation needed to undertake. He was the outsider who would become the savior, the man of humble origins who would reach the pinnacle of power. By embodying these powerful myths, he transcended mundane politics and connected with the unconscious of the electorate. People weren't just voting for a politician. They were participating in an epic story. From a dark psychology viewpoint, the creation of a personal myth is a form of identity engineering. It involves the careful selection and emphasis of certain aspects of a person's life, while others that are less favorable or more complex are downplayed or omitted. Obama's history as a community organizer, for example, was used to solidify his image as a servant of the people, overshadowing his time at elite institutions like Harvard Law School, which could have painted him as part of the establishment. It is the art of telling the right story, to the right audience, at the right time. The risk of this myth-making is that it creates an icon, not a human being. Icons are inflexible and fragile. When the man behind the myth inevitably exhibits human flaws, makes unpopular decisions, or fails to deliver on the messianic promise, the disillusionment can be catastrophic. The fall from the pedestal is far more painful than a simple political disagreement. The mythical persona that propelled him to power becomes a gilded cage, trapping him in a standard of perfection that is impossible to maintain. Thus, Obama's legacy is intrinsically linked to this biographical narrative. It was his greatest strength, and perhaps the heaviest burden he carried. He taught us that in the age of mass media, a compelling personal story can be more powerful than any political platform. The careful construction of a personal myth is not just storytelling. It's an advanced form of perception management, a tool that shapes how people think and feel before a single policy is even debated. The ability to inspire is seen as an unquestionable virtue, but dark psychology invites us to examine its hidden side. The inspiration generated by a leader like Obama, based on charisma and oratory, can create a dangerous phenomenon: the transfer of responsibility. When a leader is perceived as immensely competent, charismatic, and inspiring, the public can fall into a state of passive complacency, expecting him alone to solve all problems. The slogan, "Yes, we can," subtly transforms into "Yes, he can." This effect is a form of mass psychological delegation. The overwhelming complexity of the world's problems creates an anxiety that individuals yearn to alleviate. An inspiring leader offers a powerful relief from this anxiety, becoming the repository for the hopes and responsibilities of millions. People feel good and hopeful, not because they are taking action, but because they believe the right person is in charge. This can diminish civic engagement and critical scrutiny, as faith in the leader replaces citizen vigilance. Inspiration, in this context, can function as a sedative. It calms the masses and focuses their energy on adoration and support, rather than on questioning and demanding accountability. We saw this in rallies that resembled rock concerts, where emotional catharsis and celebration of the leader's figure were the main goal. The atmosphere of positivity and unity is so powerful that it can make critical analysis of policies and their consequences seem like an act of cynicism or disloyalty, effectively silencing dissent within his own camp of supporters. Asterisk, the price of this inspirational genius is paid when reality inevitably sets in. When problems persist or new crises arise, the same crowd that was inspired can feel abandoned or betrayed. The transfer of responsibility reverses, and all the blame is projected back onto the leader who was once seen as a savior. This creates a volatile cycle of idealization and devaluation, which is characteristic of unstable psychological dynamics and hinders the building of mature, sustainable political progress. Therefore, Obama's legacy of inspiration is a paradox. He undoubtedly motivated a generation and broke historical barriers, but the very strength of his charisma may have inadvertently taught a dangerous lesson: that the solution to our problems lies in finding the right figurehead, rather than building a resilient system and an active citizenry. True inspiration empowers people to act, whereas charismatic inspiration runs the risk of merely making them wait for a hero. Now that time has passed, what is the lasting lesson from Obama's presidency? Through the lens of the psychology of influence, the main lesson is that the power of perception, once consolidated, has an incredibly long inertia. Obama's image as a calm intellectual, an inspiring speaker, and a unifier remains intact in the minds of many, often detached from the concrete results of his policies. This demonstrates that the battle for the narrative is perhaps more important than the political battle itself. Whoever controls the story controls the legacy. The Obama phenomenon also teaches us about the deep human yearning for symbols. In times of uncertainty and division, people don't just seek a competent manager. They seek a symbol that can embody their highest ideals. Obama became the symbol of intelligence, grace, and progress. This symbolic status protected him from many of the criticisms that would have destroyed a more conventional politician. An attack on him was not just an attack on a man, but an attack on an ideal. A much harder battle to win in the arena of public opinion. Analyzing the risks, the greatest danger of such a charismatic reign is the vacuum it leaves behind. Politics after Obama seemed to many to be harsher, louder, and less inspiring. His leadership style set an almost impossible standard to follow, leading to a kind of nostalgia that can distort the assessment of subsequent leaders. This charismatic hangover can make the public long for another symbolic savior, rather than engaging in the hard and often frustrating work of democratic politics, which is rarely inspiring. Inspiration, when compared to manipulation, is a matter of outcome and transparency. Genuine inspiration empowers people with information and autonomy, while manipulation moves them through emotion and obfuscation. Obama's presidency had elements of both. He inspired millions to get involved in politics, but he also used techniques of perception management and narrative ambiguity that are classic tools of manipulation. The truth, as always, is not black and white, but lies in deeply complex shades of gray. In the end, the study of Barack Obama's power of persuasion is a masterclass in the architecture of modern influence. It shows us that charisma, narrative, and emotional control are not just personal qualities, but strategic tools of immense power. Learning to recognize these techniques, both in leaders we admire and those we despise, is the only way to become more conscious and less susceptible citizens, capable of separating the truth from the performance, no matter how brilliant it may be. Persuasion is the subtlest of the psychological arts of war, and to understand it is to understand the true nature of power. The strategies that shape nations are the same ones that can shape your own life. To continue unraveling the invisible forces that govern us, subscribe now to The Truth, Dark Psychology. Leave your comment with your conclusions, and, most importantly, hit the notifications bell. That way, you'll never miss the chance to discover the truth behind the facade. Until the next analysis,